I'm Eleanor Wachtel, and this is Writers and Company. Today, wit, satirist, and all-round inspired cultural commentator Fran Lebowitz. I've admired Fran Lebowitz ever since she published her first book, Metropolitan Life, more than 30 years ago, followed by Social Studies. And I haven't stopped quoting from them ever since. If anything, I've come to appreciate her even more in recent years. In Martin Scorsese's 2010 feature documentary, Public Speaking, and elsewhere on public platforms, what's revealed is not only a terrifically witty cultural satirist, but also an astute, engaged, politically brilliant, and yes, very funny thinker. An idiosyncratic kind of public intellectual. Fran Lebowitz was born in Morristown, New Jersey in 1950 into a middle-class Jewish family. She managed to get herself kicked out of high school and moved to New York City, where she did a variety of jobs such as cleaning apartments, selling advertising, taxi driving, and bulk mailing. When she was 20, she was already writing for Andy Warhol's Interview magazine and soon had her own column called I Cover the Waterfront. She also wrote for Mademoiselle. When her satirical pieces were collected into a book, it was an extraordinary bestseller. Critics dubbed her the funniest woman in America and compared her to everyone from Dorothy Parker to Oscar Wilde, from Alexis de Tocqueville to Mary McCarthy. In other words, she was an original. More recently, Lebowitz has written for Vanity Fair. She published a children's book, illustrated by the noted American architect Michael Graves, and she's worked on a couple of novels. She famously describes herself as slothful, and or suffering from not just writer's block, but writer's blockade. But at the same time, from her perch on the media and public speaking circuit, she's a one-of-a-kind intellectual voice. Earlier this month, Fran Lebowitz was at the University of Alberta's Festival of Ideas in Edmonton, where I spoke to her on stage before a sold-out audience. Shortly before her appearance, I also had the opportunity for a private, more intimate conversation, which you'll hear shortly. But first, here's a taste of the public Fran Lebowitz. Fran Lebowitz, what upsets you most in the political landscape at the moment?
Are you kidding? You think we have time for that? I would not know where to start, really. Well, I would have to say, generally speaking, we hurtle backwards ever faster. The thing about the Republicans is that things that were done 30 years ago, you cannot move forward if they keep going backward. Things that you think, okay, we've done that. Right now, the Supreme Court has agreed to consider the Civil Rights Act of 1965. It is their desire, they're really trying to hold back the hands of time. And they are somewhat succeeding because they have, we have a horrible Supreme Court. I don't know if you keep up with that, but it's pretty horrible. So that's one of the reasons it was imperative that Obama win, because there might be one or two appointments to the Supreme Court. And these people live forever. No one lives longer than Supreme Court judges. No one.
Even one who never speaks at the court.
Yes, they live forever, even longer than those people, in Russia, the ones who eat yogurt, and they live to be like, they live much longer than those people. They live to be hundreds and hundreds of years old. My theory as to why that is because it's such a good job. This is my wish, my fantasy.
Your dream job.
Yeah, my dream job is to be a Supreme Court judge. I would love to do this. I actually read Supreme Court opinions. I make snap judgments, so I'd be very efficient.
None of these long deliberations.
No, and you don't have to be a lawyer to be on the Supreme Court, and I'm already not a lawyer. So I am ready to be a Supreme Court judge. I don't expect to be one. I don't want you to think I'm insane, but I would like to be one.
But you've played a judge on Law and Order.
I did, an arraignment judge, which is a far cry from a Supreme Court judge. Yes, I did. And I really enjoyed it. I did it a couple times a year for about 6 years. And the second, it was a tiny, tiny part. I never had more than 2 or 3 lines. And I would arrive there, and the second I would arrive there, I would put my robe on. And the wardrobe person would say, Fran, you don't have to. No, that's okay. It's a fantastic job. It's the best seat in a room is from the bench. Because everyone is looking up at you. And you have a gavel. It's a dream.
Fran Lebowitz, your first essay collection, Metropolitan Life, came out in 1978 when you were only 27. When a book of comic essays wasn't likely to get much attention, Were you surprised by its reception?
Not as surprised as the publisher. Because the publisher kept saying, this kind of book hasn't been published in the United States since the 1920s. It's just not a popular form at all. And I just said, so what? Not that I had any power to say anything, but now, of course, as you may or may not know, there are many books of comic essays. This is my fault.
So David Sedaris, we can blame on you?
David Sedaris is good.
I know.
But there's many others who are not. And you can blame them on David Sedaris.
Let's talk for a moment about wit, because it's something different, you say, from comedy. How do you see it working?
Well, it's just, to me, it seems like it's colder. Wit implies judgment. Comedy doesn't necessarily do that. There's all kinds of comedy. And it's also not a particularly American form, you must admit.
Wit is not
Yes.
American?
No. There are witty Americans, but it's not a highly valued thing in America because it's elitist.
And the difference is just a matter of temperature?
Yes, I think that it is kind of cold.
Or is it subtlety? Is it to do with that?
It can be subtle. It can be subtle, but it must be cold. By cold, I mean you can't be that empathetic. And so that's not really a problem for me.
I don't think that's really true, but I understand that's your line, but I don't think it's really...
I don't mean as a person, but I mean if you're...
Oh, okay. If you make that distinction,
yes, I'm
fair.
a delightful person.
I know.
People are always astonished, but...
Now, you famously haven't written, or at least you haven't finished writing another book. Your writer's blockade, as you once described it, has gone on for something more or less 30 years.
Generations.
It's about 30 years. But can you tell me about your process of not writing? How that
I've never been asked that question. Well, if you feel the urge to write, just lie down and read a book, it'll pass. There's and I would suggest this to many other people who do write.
But do you understand? Obviously, at some level, it's painful for you not to be able to write because all your life you wanted to be a writer, you love writing, or you loved having written. Do you understand why?
No, if I understood why I wasn't writing, I would fix it. Obviously. So I have no idea why. I do not know why. I know some reasons for it. I would say chief among the reasons that why I don't write is just sloth. Writing is really hard. It's really hard. I believe there's only one job harder than writing, that is coal mining. So the only people I ever feel sorry for are coal miners. Whenever a coal miner is going, I think, yes, give them whatever they know. That is a horrible job. And then writing. I don't like to do hard things. I don't like to work at all. I would have been a perfect heiress. Really. So I think, that's part of it. That isn't obviously all of it, but I really don't know what it is. If you do know, please tell me.
I think you once said that fear was involved.
Oh yeah, it's definitely, I have a tremendous fear of writing. And in fact, all my fear has now coalesced into just fear of writing. Otherwise, I'm incredibly brave.
So have you gone to see a shrink about this? Is it?
No. I cannot think of anything more boring than going. I really cannot think of anything more boring than going to a psychiatrist.
I would think the shrinks would be fighting over you
as well. I'm not fighting over that. I know many people who go to psychiatrists, and I not know one person who got better. All the people I know keep going to psychiatrists. They're just the same as they've always been. The person who goes to psychiatrist all the time. And also, the older I get, the less interested I am in myself.
Yeah.
Yes, that is absolutely true. I become much less interested in myself. I've known myself a long time. At a certain point, it's enough.
Does it make you more interested in other people?
Well, more interested in, yes, at a distance.
At a distance?
Yes. Just less interested in my own life, because at a certain point, I haven't done every single thing in the world, obviously, but I've done similar things. so that yes, I think it's natural to be. I think you should become less interested in yourself as you get older, because other people are less interested in you. You might as well join in. They might be right.
Can you tell me something about the book or books that you haven't finished? I've heard of the novel called Exterior Signs of Wealth, which you once described as a novel of manners, with lots of characters.
Yeah, that's you're really a good researcher, because that is so far away. You're, in fact, an historian. Yes, I have half of that novel, about half. And then, I can't remember how long ago this was, but I would say about maybe 7 or 8 years ago, I agreed to write another book to contractually replace that book, since I owe them about $50 zillion. And my editor actually said, could you write a book in 3 months? And I said, yes. It takes me 3 months to write a thank you note. So I have half of that book.
Is that the one called Progress?
It is called Progress. Yes.
Was that an ironic title?
I am profoundly an ironist.
You've noticed that contemporary culture is soaked in nostalgia, is how you put it, that there's nothing new. What is it with nostalgia? What's that trend about?
I don't know. But I mean, the popular, people always say in the United States, the popular culture, like we have some other culture, like we have a high culture to put against them. The popular culture, for like the last 35 or 40 years, is an endless merry-go-round of nostalgia. It's like we live in an age of collage. To me, it seems to me, someone my age should be very irritated by young people. Should be saying, like, what will they think of next? Instead of, like, I go to a birthday party for someone who's 20, who's the child of a friend of mine, and I recognize every single song. I think, no, their job is to do something new. That is their job. They are not doing that job. They should be annoying Fran, not boring Fran. Maybe one of the reasons it is, from people my age, is, deliberately holding back the hands of time. And from a technological point of view, because everything is available all the time, there's a kind of flatness of time in that. You can get an image from, 200 years ago, you can get an image from yesterday, you can put them together, that's collage. But the truth is, you don't make art out of other art. You make art out of life. So that's why, to me, it has this kind of tinny quality to it. And it certainly is nostalgic. People are always, going back, look at this from the 70s, or look at that. This is not healthy.
And you don't enjoy revisiting the past yourself?
I do not, no. I don't enjoy, I might enjoy revisiting my own past, but I think that is a private matter. I think there should be new things, not just new machines. All the newness is in machinery. It's like we can only do one thing at a time. And one of the primary uses of these new machines is to spread some very old ideas, some really bad old ideas.
Like what? What are you thinking of when you say that?
Religious fundamentalism, things from really the past, things that really are bad, not just boring, but actually bad. And then you can spread these old ideas with these new machines in 2 seconds. A terrible combo, a bad combination. You have to agree. I see you do. For the radio audience, she was nodding her head.
Fran Lebowitz with me at the Citadel Theatre in Edmonton for the University of Alberta's Festival of Ideas. A few hours before her onstage appearance, I had the opportunity to speak with Fran in private. Here's our conversation. I'd like to start with books, not those that you have written or not written, but your weird and wonderful library. Can you tell me about your reading tastes?
I'm such a promiscuous reader, really. I mean, for instance, in my library, if you want to call it that, there's more than one section, but there's at least one section that I know actually pretty close to exactly how many books I have now, because I moved 2 years ago. And now I want to move again, and every time I say, I really want to move, everyone I know goes, oh, Fran, you can't move.
Okay, so how many thousand books?
9,500 books in alphabetical order.
And that's only because the guy who did the library for me made me get rid of probably about 1,000 books. I've been like crawling around secondhand bookstores my whole life. So that it turns out, when we're unpacking, it turns out that I have really what I would call a small but vivid collection of books on the subject of soap carving. And why, you might ask? Because every time I've seen one of these books, they're very beautiful. They're always done, it's very often a silhouette. They're black with a white, beautiful swan made of soap. So, I don't want to say for sure because New York is a very densely populated place, but I might have the most books about soap carving. So this is in a section that Kurt, the guy who made the library, just said, look, Fran, we just have to have a section for these crazy books. And then when we go through books, he would look and he'd go, crazy, right? And it would just go in the crazy book section.
But you said that you find them useful.
I do. Well, I like to look at them. I mean, I wouldn't say that, every year I put my hand in every book, but I frequently refresh myself or I remember, something because I don't have any of these modern machines where people look things up. And also because my mind is furnished by this stuff. So, I'll be trying to describe something to someone else, say, wait, I'm going to look it up. But I can put my hand on every book in my library because of how well organized they are.
And is there a book that changed your life? A book or books that really stuck with you?
No. I think just from the moment I learned to read, which I almost exactly remember the sensation of which, in my old age, I relate to the sensation that I felt when my father let go of the bicycle, when, my father taught me how to ride a bike. So I don't know how they do it now, but they used to run alongside you, or at least my father would run alongside you, and you would be terrified, and then all of a sudden he would let go, and then he would grab you again. And the moment at which I realized, no. And I realized I've left my father behind. And I was sick. And when I first realized that I actually was just reading, without doing it word by word the way that you learn, or at least we learn to read. I don't know how they teach people to read now, or if they in fact teach people to read now. I've always found reading to be absolutely better than my life at any rate. So, I prefer it to life. Even in periods where my life was, fine. Or even sometimes good. I still would rather read.
Do you reread books?
Yes. And even as a child I did that. And they don't have to be great books. Sometimes you reread them just because they're in some way a comforting book. This is something that you might do, or I might do, with mysteries, which I have a zillion. And there are certain mysteries and mainly this is to keep me from killing someone. In other words, to calm me down, because...
Because mysteries, of course, you would know the mystery.
I don't care about it. And by the way,
you don't care about plot?
No, I do not care about puzzles. I really don't care. And some mysteries that I've read more than once, if there's a long enough period of time, you can surprise me again. Even in a kind of dopey movie where every 8-year-olds are going, he did it. I think, really? How did you know that? Because I realize, of course, the reason for that is because I'm not paying attention to that, I guess. I guess I don't care who did it. Because reading is an escape. Unfortunately, in life, I always know who did it. And so I believe that the reason I don't look for who did it in mysteries is because I'm trying to escape from knowing who did it.
And what about plot in more serious fiction? Is that something that matters?
Yeah, it's not something that I'm willing to totally give up. If you're asking me, for instance, I do not, although I'm a tremendous fan of modernism in painting, I'm not a tremendous fan of it in writing. I don't think that writing really lends itself to being that abstract. I don't, because we think in words. There's no other art form like writing because we think. Everybody thinks in words. In everyone's head, or I'm assuming, not that I've been in anyone else's head, there's a billion words going through my head 24 hours a day. And every single thing that goes through your head, or at least mine, is words. Although I always interrogate composers. How do you think of these songs, or melodies? And it's because they are not thinking in words. But since more people are like me than are like composers, let's face it, because they always say the songs occur to them. They're hearing them already. So I wouldn't call that thinking, but that's it's a way of creating. To me, the closest thing in the world to a human being is a book. I know everyone says it's supposed to be some kind of chimpanzee or something, but, I think that's at the other end of the spectrum. But I really think that's why I think that writers are godlike. We make something, or I haven't made many, but we make something that is like a human being. It's a godlike act.
And that's why you've said that writers need to be able to think. That's why there are no prodigies in the same way that there can be musical prodigies.
They need to know things.
They need to know
yes,
things.
writers need to know things. That, there are no writing prodigies, by which I mean there's no 8-year-old novelist. I mean, there may be, in fact, but I mean, I, for instance, wrote a novel when I was 8 years old, but you wouldn't particularly be interested in reading it. But I mean, there's no Mozart of literature. And there are really only prodigies in music and mathematics. And I think that's because they are abstract forms. And so you don't need to know things. You need to know things about life to write. And you don't know things when you're 8 years old. You may be able to make things up, make stories up. And that's not the kind of writer I am. And, from knowing Toni Morrison, for instance, she very often, and has always since I've known her, which has been since like 1978, talked to me about her novels as she's writing them. And it's a process of pure imagination that I don't go through myself. I don't have that type of mind. But still, it's not abstract. It's not like music. It's not like mathematics. It's composed of words.
And because books are composed of words, then they don't lend themselves to abstraction, is what you're saying?
To me, they don't. I don't, I know you're not allowed to say this, but, I don't love Virginia Woolf. I don't love, things pulled to that degree of dryness in literature. Whereas, I do love abstract painting. It's a degree of rigor that I think is unnecessary in reading and writing.
Fran Lebowitz, you've described yourself as having a horribly perfect memory. Why horribly?
Well, I mean, would you want to remember every single thing that ever happened to you? It's horrible to have I think it's horrible to have a great memory. I mean, it's horrible to have no memory, of course, but I think that's, when people say, you look depressed. I never think of myself as being depressed. I mean, I've been depressed in my lifetime, but I don't think of myself as being a depressed person. I think of myself as being a morose person, which I think is a kind of a cast of mind. And I think that an aspect of that cast of mind is I remember everything. It's not great because not every memory is great. And because also you build something out of these memories, which in my case largely is a grudge.
Is a grudge?
Yes.
Why? Why?
Because you remember, you remember like
you
all
must
the
remember
things.
good things as well as
I remember
bad
the good things, yeah. But I also remember things that make me angry. I mean, I'm mostly really pretty angry, I have to say.
And does it annoy other people that you remember so well?
Well, sometimes they don't believe me. No, I'm, in fact, at this point in life, or even in the last 20 years, I'm quite a resource in New York because not only do I remember everything, I stopped drinking and taking drugs when I was 19. So now I remember everything that no one remembers. People say, ask Fran. She was straight. She wasn't high. So I do remember things.
And why so abstemious?
Because by the time I was 19, I had drunk my lifetime supply of alcohol. I think everyone gets a lifetime supply. You can drink it throughout your entire life, from, say, age 20 to age 90, or you can drink it all between age 15 and 19, which is what I did.
Are your memories accompanied by sensory perceptions?
Yeah, in a certain way, or they can certainly be evoked by that. Everyone knows. The smells of certain things, absolutely, yeah. I can remember. But once I described to my parents the inside of a crib that they put up for me at my grandparents' house. And my mother said, it's impossible, you can't remember that. A crib, you're like not even a year old or something like that. And then when this crib was taken out to accommodate one of my cousins who's much younger than me, and I said, my mother said there was no such crib. There was not a crib like that at Grandma's house. And then my uncle takes it and this crib appears. So I was completely correct.
Is that your earliest memory?
That is my earliest memory. But I really remember things from being really little. Really little because I also remember the landscape of a very, very tiny child, which is, a kind of world of knees. I kind of remember that. And certain, if I see certain pieces of furniture that were around during my childhood or pieces of furniture like that, I can remember seeing them from that level. This is not very useful, by the way. I haven't found a great use for this.
No, but having a good memory, it would be a great resource for writing a memoir, although that's not necessarily a genre you approve of. Although maybe for other people, maybe for you it's okay.
I can't imagine writing a memoir.
No?
I mean, at this point, I can't imagine writing much of anything, but I
why?
definitely could not. I would never want to do that. I would have no desire. I have no desire to reveal myself like that to other people. Zero. I'm surprised so many people don't have that desire.
Well, you grew up in Morristown, New Jersey. What can you tell me about Morristown?
Well, it was very, I had a lovely childhood. I was very well suited to being a child. I mean, I'm still pretty well suited to being a child. I mean, I was very well suited to being a child, partially because when I was a child, one of the biggest requirements in school, I was a wonderful grammar school student, fantastic. Basically, because the biggest requirement was, in my grammar school was drawing pilgrims, which I was fantastic at. I even practiced. I loved doing it. I loved doing all those childish things. But it was a horrible place to be a teenager. I mean, everybody hates being a teenager. Almost everybody hates being a teenager. But I really hated it because I instantly became a very bad student, first of all.
Why? What happened? What flipped
algebra.
over?
I believe algebra caused this. I'm guessing algebra. Because I lived in a world that I didn't realize the world is perfect. There's no algebra. But then there was algebra. And in my case, there was algebra 1 like 5 times. I still don't even know what it is, algebra. And I became plagued by algebra. And to me, I even associate algebra with the smell of certain schools. If I walk into a school and you smell like kind of that like public school hallway, I just think, algebra, what is it? Why are they torturing me with it? It was the first thing really presented to me that I absolutely could not understand at all and had no interest in understanding. And I just saw my life stretching out to one algebra 1 class after another. So I really hated being a teenager. And also, the suburbs are bad places for teenagers, or a small town. It was a suburb, but it was really more of a small town. I think it's very nice for children if you live in a town like that. There are no towns like that anymore because we had so much freedom. So I really enjoyed that. So I enjoyed the level of freedom that you had in a small town when I was a child. No one was ever keeping track of you. You weren't even allowed to stay in the house. If it was a weekend or if it was after school, if it wasn't, pouring, and we just were allowed to roam around the whole time. There was no idea anything would ever happen to us. Once you got a bike, you could bike everywhere. So mostly I was always trying to escape the parental authority, which did not reside only in parents when I was a child. Every adult could behave that way toward you, by which I mean tell you what to do, yell at you. But once you're a teenager, this becomes very confining. There is no freedom that you want as a teenager. I really hated being a teenager, and I hated living there as a teenager, and so I left.
But before that, during the idyllic childhood period, your father owned a furniture store. Were you allowed to hang out there? Did you lounge on the couches, bounce on the beds?
We were not allowed we were not allowed to bounce on anything or hang. And still, I'll see someone put a glass on a wooden table, and I think, are you insane? He also had a shop, an upholstery shop. Sometimes we would go there, but we didn't hang around there. And especially in the shop, we weren't, because there were a lot of dangerous things. When my father died, I discovered my father had kept all of these tools that had been his father. His father was an upholsterer. And some of these scissors are, they could use them to behead someone. And so there was always stuff on the floor. I thought when I was a child, and I would go to the shop, the way that, I don't think they probably do this anymore, but when they were upholstering a piece of furniture, my father would fill his mouth with upholstery tacks and then kind of spit them onto the hammer. So I literally thought my father was like a Superman. My father can swallow tacks. But the second we walk in the shop, everyone would start yelling, "Be careful, don't step there, don't step there." So
and what about at home? Was it a quiet, orderly house? Noise?
It was orderly. No, it was orderly. My father was a very, very orderly person. When he died and I cleaned out the house and everything.
This was just a couple of years ago?
4 years ago, my father died. My father had shoes that were in perfect condition, from 1940, from the second he got out of the army. My father was in the infantry in Germany during the war, a horrible place to be, and he was a boy. He was just 18. But the habits that you're supposed to have as a soldier, my father had. The second he went in there, he already had those habits. And I think because his father was like that, too, and there were 5 children in my father's family, and they lived in small apartments. They didn't have any money. So orderly and quiet, yes. It definitely was orderly and quiet. And so, of course, I gravitated to houses and we had rule for every imaginable.
Your mother was like that, too?
Well, I think my mother would have been a little less like that, but she was like that, and she was also very careful of things. And so I do have that. So I see someone put their foot on a piece of furniture, I think, what? Get your feet off my furniture. And I do that by myself. A friend of mine said, "You have so many rules in your house." I said, "Yes, but I abide by them."
So they don't seem like rules to you.
Yes. No, you're not allowed to eat in my bedroom. You are not allowed to eat in my bedroom. Sometimes I think, well, I guess it would be comfortable to like eat in the bedroom, but I'm not allowed, so I wouldn't think of doing it.
And siblings? You have
I have a younger sister, a younger, much, much taller sister.
much, much taller. How did that happen?
I don't know, but believe me, I bear a certain amount of resentment for this.
I hear that.
Yes, I mean she's like tiny bit under 6 feet tall.
Almost 6 feet tall?
Yeah, I mean she might be 6 feet tall.
Now, you remarked that people often think you're an only child. Does that please you?
Well, I understand what that means. You know, I mean, it does. I mean, it's kind of no. It doesn't please me. I mean, it's really a kind of an insult. I mean, if I was an only child, it would be okay. You know, but I understand.
Oh, there's sometimes a blur between firstborn and only child.
Yeah, well, I think there's a pretty big blur in my case. I think there's a pretty big blur. People are always astonished that I have a sibling.
More important, I guess, is what your role in the family. I mean, did you have a lot to say even as a child?
I've always been exactly the same. I mean, I used to be shorter, but otherwise, I mean,
You
yes,
talked a lot. You made people laugh.
I talked a lot, but I was. Oh, it's the thing I was most punished for.
For talking?
I mean, yes, constantly. You know, in school. I mean, my first day of kindergarten ended with me sitting in the corner, holding up a sign with a Band-Aid pasted on my mouth, holding up a sign saying, "I am a chatterbox." Because we weren't allowed to talk in school when I was in school. I mean, you weren't allowed to talk except...
Even kindergarten?
Yes. And so I would be talking, or the teacher would ask a question, and I would answer it even though someone else had been called upon. And, yeah, so I was like this, but I was punished for it.
What about being funny? Were there witty people in your family? Anyone as a role model?
Well, after my first book came out, some of my father's friends said, "Oh, so I guess you get your funniness from your father." And I thought, really? He's funny? I mean, he didn't talk that much around us. So, I guess, he was thought to be funny by his friends. So, I mean, my father was hardly ever, I'm home, by which I mean, that was a common thing. My father worked 6 days a week. His store was open 2 nights a week. We ate dinner together every night. But, and we would talk a little bit at dinner, but my father talked to my mother at dinner. And I would tell, about my day or say something. But when I was a child, adults were very uninterested in children's conversation. And in fact, the thing most frequently said to children was, "You're just a child." And I would say, "You know what I think? No one cares what you think. You're just a child." But now people listen very intently.
But did you quickly recognize certain advantages to being funny?
I never thought about it. I never thought about it at all until in the 9th grade at my junior high school graduation. They gave awards, and I got this award, Class Wit. And I actually was worried about bringing it home because my mother was always telling me from the time I was 12 or whatever, don't be funny around boys. Boys don't like funny girls. She was always telling me that. But I never really thought, I didn't think about it. And certainly mostly I was punished for it. I was punished for it in school, I was punished for it at home. So I didn't really think of it as a big advantage. I didn't think about it that much. And when I started writing, for publication, I didn't think I'm going to write something funny. I just came out that way. So, but I did notice that people then very much were commenting on it. So that's probably why I stuck with it, But I didn't set out to do that.
Although you've told a story about organizing your whole neighborhood into a circus with yourself as the ringmaster.
Oh, for Halloween.
What do you think that says about you?
I'm bossy, And I was always thinking up stuff for the neighborhood to do. I was like a kind of like a ringleader of the neighborhood. So I was always thinking up here's what we're going to do. We're going to build a cabin, or I would read something and think let's do this. I read this in Nancy Drew. We're going to do this, And so I think that's why and Halloween I loved when I was a child. And so around August I started thinking, what should I be for Halloween? I put a lot of thought into this.
What?
Yes.
You like dressing up?
I like candy. It was something we were not really allowed to have that often. And so the idea that I could go around the entire town and people would put candy in which I invented in my town, the use of the pillowcase instead of a bag so you could get more candy.
But you tell a terrible story about when you were dressed up as Humpty Dumpty.
That's right, yes. Because I thought, I don't know how I got the idea to do that. And my father, had 2 seamstresses who worked in the shop. And they made this Humpty Dumpty thing for me, which was required that you stuff it with pillows. And it was probably very clever looking, but the pillows were constantly, it was the worst Halloween of my life. The pillows were constantly falling out, and in every single house, the mother would have to restuff, and I would, like at each house, I would say, Mrs. Farrington, could you fix my, and so it interfered a lot with my candy acquiring.
Did you ever, as a child, you liked to read, and you started to write early?
I did. I wrote a lot as a child. I really enjoyed.
What kinds of things?
Well, I did write this book. I mean, it
a novel when you were 8?
Yes. I mean, it was probably like 50 pages. It was not the size of it. Still, that's a lot for
That's
a
a
child.
lot, yeah.
And it was, it was copied from Nancy Drew. I can't remember the title, but the title was literally something like The Secret Key because I love the Nancy Drew books.
And did you imagine yourself as a writer? Is that one of the things you thought of being?
Yes. I thought of being a writer. As soon as I realized that people wrote books, when I was really little, I didn't realize that people wrote books. I thought they were like trees, that they were just there. And then I would be like looking. I remember like seeing a book of, one of my parents' books, and in the jacket flap was a picture of someone, and I said, "Who's that?" My mother said, "That's the man that wrote the book." That seemed like such a huge thing to be able to do. So that's why I wanted to do it.
Did you save any of your juvenilia?
I did discover, I don't know, several years ago, I can't remember in what incarnation, this book I wrote as a kid, because it was in a loose leaf. It was in a loose leaf notebook, and it was written in pencil. And then it disappeared again. I don't know where it is. My parents saved nothing. When I went through their house, I wrote tons and tons of things. I wrote plays for my sister and my cousins to be in, and holidays. My parents saved nothing that I did. All my other friends, their parents saved every little thing.
But you said you've come from a literary tradition from a family where the literary tradition is the picture postcard.
Yeah. It was not I wouldn't say it was not a value thing. It wasn't even a thought of thing. For instance, when my first book came out, my grandmother wouldn't come to my book party. My father's mother, my mother's mother was dead already, but my father's mother, I called her and I said, I wrote a book. And she said, I heard. I said, well, there's going to be a party for my book. Would you come to this party? Where is it? New York? My grandmother lived in Brooklyn. So she made this distinction between New York and Brooklyn. Yes, I can't come, she said. I said, why not? She was very old at the time. It wasn't like she was working or anything. So she said, I can't walk. Now, they still have the L where she lived in Brighton Beach. I said, no one expects you to take the subway. Someone will pick you up in a car. I can't go.
What do you think it was?
I said, why not? She said, to tell you the truth, it's just not worth it to me to go all the way to New York for a book. For a wedding, I'll come. So that's what was valued. She didn't come. And I was one of her favorite grandchildren. She had many, because she had 5 children. But I was one of her favorites because I was named after her mother. But books, she didn't care.
You've said that one of the reasons you were expelled from high school was your constant reading.
One of the reasons I didn't do my work in school was because I was reading. And I was very often thrown out of the classroom for reading, even in grammar school, because I would put a book I was reading behind my book. The geography book I would hold it up, and then behind it I would put, I was thrown out of class in grammar school numerous times because I was reading James Thurber, and you could not stop laughing. You cannot secretly read James Thurber. Even a kind of inattentive teacher is going to know that you're howling with laughter.
Behind the geography book.
Yes. And I was when I was home and I was supposed to be doing homework, the desk in my room had a drawer, and I would put the book I was reading in the drawer, and I would put my math book on the desk, and I would read the book in the drawer. And when my mother would come into the room, I would just lean in and close the drawer, and she would say, "I know you're reading in there. Leave the door open." You can't close your door of your bedroom when you're doing homework. Leave the door open. I know you're reading in there. Basically, my whole life, I've almost never read for more than 10 minutes without feeling guilty. Because no matter what I'm reading, I know I should be doing something else, which would be doing something instead of just reading. I didn't do my homework because I was reading. I didn't do my work in class because I was reading. And I don't write because I'm reading. I don't know if that's the reason, but that's what I'm doing instead.
So why did you get expelled from high school?
I don't know exactly. I mean, it was a private school. They didn't really have to give you a reason.
Was that unusual that your parents would send you to private school?
Oh, yes, it was more than unusual. I was sent to this school because I was doing so badly in public school. I mean, my grades were so terrible, really terrible. I mean, I would get report cards that were all Fs.
It wasn't just algebra?
No, it was everything. Because I hated high school and I was sleeping. This last time I could sleep was in high school. Like sometimes I have horrible insomnia, and I had it even when I was a child. But when I was a teenager, I couldn't stay awake. And especially in school, I would walk in to my first class, I would put my head on the desk, fall asleep, the bell would ring, I'd get up, I'd walk down I was just incredibly weary when I was a teenager. So the public school told my parents, well, she's such a horrible student, she's doing so badly, and that she's never, ever going to get into college. And so they sent me to private school at a tremendous financial sacrifice, which was mentioned hourly. And then the headmaster of this school basically just, I believe, said to my mother, she is a very bad influence on the other girls. It was an Episcopalian girls' school. She's a very bad influence on the other girls, and she is usurping my power. Now, what this could possibly mean, I really don't know. But
were you a ringleader even then?
I guess I was a tiny school. It was really a minute school. In my class, by which I mean in the senior class, this was my senior year, there were 12 girls. I mean, that's not even like a class that's not even a math class in a regular school. I think, in retrospect, I think I was thrown out of school for what my mother used to call that look on your face. Wipe that look off your face. And I just think it was, I was emanating, I think, quite a bit of contempt at that age, and so I think that's what it was.
Fran Lebowitz with me in Edmonton for the University of Alberta's Festival of Ideas. She's my guest on Writers and Company on CBC Radio 1, on Sirius Satellite Radio 159, and around the world on cbc.ca. I'm Eleanor Wachtel. Fran Lebowitz, after being expelled from high school, you moved to New York City in the late 1960s. What did you do? How did you find your feet?
When I think back, it seems like you did that.
Yeah.
When I decided to move to New York, because when I got thrown out of high school, first I was sent to live with my mother's sister, who...
Where does she live?
In Poughkeepsie. So you can imagine why that was punishment.
Worse than Morristown, farther away from New York.
Yes. But when I turned 18, I left, and I remember very vividly walking into my parents' bedroom and saying, I'm moving to New York. And I remember exactly what my mother said. She said, but we don't know anyone in New York. And I thought my mother meant I wouldn't have any friends in New York. And I said, well, I'll make friends. I didn't know anything about the world. And my mother, who was, not the most worldly person on the planet, knew you need to know people. We don't know anyone. But I didn't know that. I didn't know the way the world worked at all. I had zero idea how the world worked, which was helpful because people sometimes who know just enough to stop them from doing something. So I didn't know. It didn't seem like an insurmountable thing. Well, so what? What does that even mean? So I went, and I didn't think about it. It's my observation that people that I know who are born in Manhattan, who are from New York, generally, of all the people I know, are less likely to have achieved their desires than someone who comes from outside. And that is because they know. They know because they're born there. They know this is a club. This is a club. I had no idea that it worked that way at all. I had zero idea. I thought it was like a wide open and waiting for Fran. So I didn't know. And that, if I did, that of course it would stop you if you really knew. Luckily, I was ignorant of this.
And were your parents dismayed? You weren't going to university. You were dropping out of high school, and you were going to New York.
Parents didn't. I wasn't. They weren't my biggest fans at that point in life. So they didn't try to stop me. I think they weren't that unhappy to see me leave.
And who did you fall in with? What friends did you make when you first?
When I first went there, I guess my parents might have been somewhat physically worried about. New York was dangerous, and so a cousin of mine, I don't know how he knew this, told my father, there's a hotel that Fran should move to, and it's called the Martha Washington Hotel. It's a hotel for women, like the Barbizon, except not fancy like that. And so my father told me, okay, I will pay for you living in New York the first 2 months if you live in this place. And I said, okay. I didn't even never heard of it. It was pretty crummy, but it was pretty expensive. It was $200 a month. I never lived in such an expensive place for years after that. And so I just I moved there, and I would wake up every morning and just walk around, and I walk into the new school on Fifth Avenue in the Village, and I would just hung around there. I was that age. I was a kid age. So I would just talk to kids and met people, but I needed money, and so I remember I met a girl in the student lounge at the new school, and she told me, oh, she's living with these two other girls, and maybe I could stay there. I went up there, and I actually became their cleaning lady. So then I thought, well, I could do this. I didn't have any skills. I didn't know how to type, which was the only way a girl to get a job. I didn't know anyone. I didn't have even a high school degree or anything. And so I became a cleaning lady with a small specialty in Venetian blinds. Then I would meet more and more people. And then I would just say, well, I would also buy the Village Voice every Wednesday, the second it came out. Then a huge amount of help wanted ads. And I would look for this type of any kind of weird.
You drove a taxi at one point?
I drove a cab, and I also was a chauffeur, a couple of different chauffeur jobs. Well, yeah, I know how to drive. I would look and think, do I know how to do this? But the answer was almost invariably no. I do not know how to do almost anything that people will pay you for, and I would not be a waitress. And that's mostly the kind of job. I refused to be a waitress. I absolutely did not want to have to be nice to people for money. And I didn't want to have to flirt with guys and most of the girls I knew who had to do that kind of work were waitresses, and I wouldn't do it. And so I would rather do something like drive a taxi.
You've talked about hanging out with much older guys, gay guys. How did that happen?
Well, most people my age were not there. They were in college. So almost everyone I met was older than me, except if I was hanging around the new school. Other than that, mostly people my age were not hanging around. Yeah, because I was maybe writing for Interview already, or maybe just before, because I was hanging out in this place called Max's, which was a kind of a bar, and that's where I met these guys. And this type of environment, Max's, there's never been since a bar like that, a place like that in New York. So it was just a kind of momentary thing, which completely suited me. And so, but of course, being young, I thought, this is what I expected to be here. But it was just a fluke of timing that happened to be there then.
How did you come to write for Andy Warhol's Interview magazine?
Well, I was writing for another even smaller magazine called Changes, and I had been writing book reviews for this other tiny magazine, and they were kind of funny book reviews. And then the girl who was writing movie reviews got an actual assignment from the New York Times, which I thought was, how could a thing like that possibly happen from this little magazine? So she went to do that, and I took her job of writing these movie reviews, and I was 20 or 21. So I wrote some movie reviews, and instantly people were talking to me about them, and I realized that, well, people were much more interested in movies than books, because more people were, and all the reviews were funny, but more people were commenting to me about the movie reviews. So then I asked the woman who owned this, we called them underground newspapers. They weren't really underground, but they just weren't very much read. I'd like to review movies. She said, well, you can't, because this person's coming back. So I had a friend who was working an Interview, and I asked him, can you get me an appointment to try to get a job there? Because Interview then was called Interview, a Film Journal, and it was a black and white quarterfold. Mostly it was just full of old movie stills. And I thought, well, then I could do it for them. And so that's how I got the job. I just asked them.
Your articles for Interview found their audience, and it was a specific cultured readership. And as you've described it, your voice as a writer was informed by that audience of young gay artists, largely lost to AIDS. Can you talk about the impact of that loss?
Well, it just made a whole world vanish. It doesn't even, it vanished almost without a trace, because it's very hard to describe this to people, because it was not a highly productive group of people, so there's not a lot left. If what you do is talk instead of write, or instead of leave something, then you disappear. And also, if you're superseded by very strong political motives, which is what happened, in other words, that sensibility is a sensibility of oppression, of marginalization, and so people don't, the same way. I'm not comparing, and I am not comparing because I think it's an erroneous and, in fact, mostly immoral comparison. I'm not comparing being gay to being black, but it's maybe the reason that most fans now of the blues are white. There aren't that many black fans of the blues, because the blues is kind of a music of oppression. And there's not, young people who are gay who have a lot of contempt for a certain kind of camp sensibility, who have no notion at all of what it was like to be gay then. And there's no real chronicle of it. There are products of it, but they don't directly relate to it because that sensibility is very indirect. So if you would say, well, I could tell you that, this book that you think is this is really this, it's a sensibility of indirection. You need a whole context for it, and the context has disappeared because everyone died. And everyone died all at once, like in a war.
But so you're talking, when you say they aren't the creators, so at what there's one layer of who were the creators.
Well, they were
creators.
A
lot of artists and
yes,
and creators.
Some of them were creators, but mostly what they created does not directly lead you to understanding the sensibility, except if you would take, say, someone like Charlie Ludlam. But he was so unknown. Most of them were so unknown at the time. And the people who saw these things also died. So that, even the audience is gone.
What's the implications of losing that audience?
Well, to me, it makes an inaccurate history, first of all. I mean, if you don't know this, it looks like, because now, of course, there's, an entire more than one academic field, gay this, gay that. But this was a totally covert world. It was deliberately secret. It wasn't like by mistake secret. It was deliberately secret. It was like, if there had been, an entire library written in disappearing ink. That's what happened. Invisible ink. So it's gone because of AIDS. And it's not just gone because people died of AIDS. It's gone because AIDS motivated people to lie in a certain way, to say, this is my theory, probably would not be a popular one. I don't believe I've ever actually publicly voiced it, but I believe this is genesis of the idea of gay marriage. The idea of gay marriage, which runs absolutely counter to the life everybody was leading before that, which no one wanted anyone to know. Here's AIDS. What if these straight people knew that these guys had sex with 10,000 people routinely? It was common. They would say, that's why you got this disease, which in a way is true, but only from a kind of viral truth. It's not a moral truth. People were very scared of the disease and of the reaction to the disease. No. So they said, no. We're just like you. And then it became true. It wasn't true. It absolutely wasn't true. Now it became true. And it erased this other thing. It was not like a natural evolution. It was not a slow thing. It was like, and it actually gave, in the end, all the unimaginable freedoms that homosexuals have now. That never would have happened otherwise, I don't think.
You think?
No. This fast? No way. It's really fast. If you look at the entire history of humans, and this happened in 5 minutes. Yes, I don't think it would have happened this fast. It may have happened eventually, but not like this. Absolutely not.
Just to back up a bit, in terms of the aesthetic loss, you've talked about this, and I find it very interesting because I hadn't heard this before in terms of the level of connoisseurship that was lost. How did that work?
Well, see, I think because when people when one became aware of one's own homosexuality, which was always awful news, to each person, this would be awful news because you were going to have a really hard life. And you were going to be estranged from everything familiar to you. And maybe you wanted to leave those things, but maybe you didn't. So that I think, this is my theory, which is that there was no visibility of homosexuality around you at all, unless you happened, maybe if you lived in New York City, or you lived in Paris. But most people didn't, and most Americans didn't. So it sent you to the library. What is this? It sent you to these places. And in a way, art is an approximation of some of these ideas. It starts out with this, and it ends up, there you are at the New York City Ballet. Now, this is, of course, not every single, homosexual. But in New York, for instance, there was a lot of contempt for people who weren't interested in these things. For instance, there were only certain kinds of jobs. If you were a very flamboyant male homosexual, you pretty much had to be a hairdresser or you weren't going to work. You could not get a job. So that type of job, which is not a job that requires a great deal of cultivation, that was very looked down upon. The generation above me used to call hairdressers hair burners because it was considered a stupid thing to do. Spend all your time doing hair as a dopey. But the love of these things, because they knew a lot about them. I talked in the movie about the New York City Ballet audience.
The Martin Scorsese film, the documentary about you. Yeah.
I talked about the New York City Ballet audience. The audience for the New York City Ballet, during the era of Balanchine and of Robbins, knew as much about the ballet as the people who made it and the people who were in it. And they loved it. And the reason they demanded you be really good at it because you were lucky enough. You're lucky enough to be Suzanne Farrell. You can dance. So I demand that you dance perfectly because you're lucky to be able to do this miraculous thing, this thing I adore. I'm guessing that this helped Suzanne Farrell be a better dancer. It may have not, it certainly couldn't have been pleasant. But if you know that the people that are watching you do the thing have these immensely high standards, you're going to be better. And that audience did. If you write something and you know the audience is going to get every little thing, you'll work to put every little thing in. I mean, I feel that, the kind of style of writing I evolved from writing an interview was absolutely because of the people who were reading it. And I knew that they would get it, and they helped me get it. I was very young. And so I think of it as a collaboration in that way, even though it was not overt. No one would ever say, you should write this or that. I wouldn't. But they appreciated it. They knew what you were doing. I think that no matter what the art form is, to have that type of reader or audience is a tremendous boon to an artist. But I don't think it really exists anymore. People don't seem to love things as much, maybe. Like movies. We were movie crazy. We went to the movies constantly. But now most people I know didn't make movies. A lot of people wanted to make movies. And we didn't know, even people who loved movies that I knew, didn't know that much about movie making. But when you know someone, for instance, Marty Scorsese, who is a library of film, just making the movie with Marty was an incredibly rich experience for me because of what I learned about movies. I always loved movies, but I didn't really know anything about them, it turns out, even though I went to zillions of them and talked about them. But Marty is someone who, if you're telling him something that happened in your life, he'll say, you know what that's exactly like, Fran? In the second reel of this Buster Keaton movie made in 1909, where he's looking in the window of a candy store trying to figure out what box of candy to buy his girlfriend, and I would always say, no, I don't know that. I'm going to run it for you. And then he runs it for you. And you see he's exactly right. And he also made me, this is not an important thing, but it's an enriching thing to my life. When I was a child, I liked silent movies very much. They showed them in the Museum of Modern Art. And my father liked them. Sometimes I would go to see them. And then I decided I didn't like silent movies, and I didn't watch them for years. And Marty's reactivated my love of silent movies. And so there are a zillion of them. So,
so he's an example of the expertise that...
Yes, the love.
The love that does still survive.
Yes.
What was the impact of that loss on you?
Well, I don't know. I never thought about it in that way, and I didn't think about it until I started talking about it many years later. Let's face it, I haven't written that much since then, so that could be it. There was a personal sense of loss, and also the evaporation of this world that I really felt at home in. But there has only been a pretty brief period of my life, relative to now how old I am.
Well, you're 62.
I just turned 62 a few weeks ago. It's not that great being 62. However, turning 60 was so horrible that 62 is better. It's a shocking age to be. 60 was so horrible that, when you would say to someone who was older than that, like when I turned 40, and I would say, my God, 40. People who are older than me say, Fran, 40 this. Even when I turned 50, which for some reason was not very traumatic for me. When I turned 50, you would say, oh my God, I'm going to be 50. And people who are older say it's not that bad. But when you're going to turn 60, people older go, you'd say it's horrible. And they say, yes, it's horrible. It's so horrible.
Yeah, I thought the trick was just to hang out with older people.
No, well, at a certain point there aren't any. Or the ones that are, are older than you, they can't recognize you. So
it's a delight to talk to you. A total delight. Thank you so much.
You are welcome.
Fran Lebowitz in Edmonton. The Fran Lebowitz Reader has recently been reissued, and Martin Scorsese's documentary about her, Public Speaking, is available on DVD. Writers and Company was produced by Sandra Rabinovich. Mary Stinson is coordinating producer. Nancy McElveen is associate producer. Technical operations by Eric Wager, with thanks this week to Mickey Andreevich. You can also hear Writers and Company through online streaming on our website. Just go to cbc.ca/writersandcompany, and the show is available as a podcast. For news and reviews all about books, check out cbc.ca/books. We always like to hear from you. Our email address is writersandco@cbc.ca, and the telephone number is 416-205-6631. I'm Eleanor Wachtel. Next week, the lighter side of dark humor with 3 award-winning novelists. From England, Howard Jacobson. From Scotland, A.L. Kennedy. And from Norway, Arland Loe. That's next week. I hope you'll join me.